The day my husband came back after 35 years, I thought it was a miracle, until I saw the young woman standing behind him, and he said she was his daughter. That was the moment my heart broke into 1,000 pieces. Broken heart. The moment I opened that old wooden door, my knees almost gave way. There he was, standing right on the porch after 35 long years, my husband Richard. His once dark hair was now white like snow, his eyes tired but familiar. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. He smiled weakly, holding his brown hat in his trembling hands. "Margaret," he whispered, his voice soft and broken, "I've come home." But before I could say a word I saw her, standing just behind him, a young woman no older than 20. She had Richard's same blue eyes, his same sharp chin. She looked frightened but curious. "Margaret," he said again, his eyes glassy with tears. This is my daughter." My world shattered. The porch spun. My heart stopped. My husband, who had left me 35 years ago without a word, was standing there, introducing me to a daughter I never knew existed. A daughter who couldn't possibly be mine. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I felt my chest tighten. My hands trembled as the truth settled in like cold rain. He hadn't just come back home. He had brought with him the proof of a life he built without me. And that was the moment my heart broke. I remember the day Richard left as if it were yesterday. The year was 1989, and we were living in a small house on Maple Street in Ohio. We had been married for 12 years then, with no children but plenty of dreams. Richard worked as a train conductor, always talking about the places he wanted to see. He was restless, always chasing something far beyond our little town. He was a good man at heart, but lately something had changed. He came home late, barely spoke to me, and always smelled faintly of tobacco and train grease. I would make him dinner, but most nights he'd just stare at his plate, lost in thought. One stormy night, while thunder shook the windows, Richard packed a small suitcase. I stood by the door, clutching my apron, not understanding what was happening. "Where are you going, Richard?" I asked, my voice cracking. He didn't look at me. "I just need some time, Margaret," he said. "Time to think." "Think about what?" I pleaded. "We can fix whatever's wrong." He sighed, buttoned his coat, and finally looked up at me. His eyes were cold, distant. "I don't know if I can be the man you need me to be anymore." And with that he walked out. The rain poured, soaking his coat as he disappeared down the street. I remember running after him, calling his name, but my voice was swallowed by the storm. That was the last I saw of Richard. Until now. Years passed like dust in the wind. I tried to move on. I took up sewing and started teaching Sunday school at the local church. The neighbors whispered, of course, they always do when a husband vanishes. "Poor Margaret," they'd say. "He probably found someone else." Those words used to cut deep, but eventually, I learned to live with the ache. I built my own peace out of loneliness. Then one afternoon, 35 years later, I was sitting on the porch knitting a blanket when I saw a dusty old truck roll up the road. I didn't think much of it, until the man stepped out. Something in my chest stirred. A strange familiar ache. He looked older, thinner, his shoulders bent with years of wear. I dropped my knitting when our eyes met. It was Richard. He stood there for a long moment, as if unsure whether to come closer. "Margaret," he said softly, "I didn't think you'd still be here." I stared at him. "Where else would I be?" I said, my voice trembling. "You left, remember?" He nodded slowly, his eyes full of guilt. "I did. And I've regretted it every single day." Before I could ask where he'd been, he turned slightly, and that's when I saw the young woman beside him. Her presence hit me like a lightning bolt. She had long brown hair tied neatly with a ribbon, and wore a pale yellow dress. She clutched a small bag in her hands, her eyes darting nervously between us. "Margaret," Richard said quietly. "This is Emily, my daughter." I felt the world tilt beneath me. I wanted to scream, to cry, to ask 1,000 questions at once, but my voice was gone. I just stared at him, my chest tightening. "Your daughter," I managed to whisper. "After all these years?" He nodded, shame flickering across his face. "I didn't plan for any of this," he said. "Life just happened." Emily looked at me with tears in her eyes, and for a moment, I saw innocence there. She wasn't to blame. But my heart didn't care about fairness at that moment. All I could feel was betrayal, cold and sharp. I stepped back, my legs weak. You had a family, while I was here waiting for you? Richard's face crumpled. I thought you'd moved on, he said. I wanted to come back, but… Don't, I said firmly, my voice breaking. Don't you dare say you wanted to come back. You had 35 years to do that. The silence that followed was heavy. Only the wind moved, brushing through the old oak trees around the porch. Then Emily stepped forward, her voice small. Mrs. Parker. I mean Miss Margaret. I didn't know about you until last year, she said. He told me you were gone. I looked at her, stunned. Gone. I repeated. Richard's eyes dropped to the ground. I told her you passed away, he whispered. My hands flew to my mouth. You told her I was dead? He nodded slowly, tears filling his eyes. The world seemed to collapse around me. 35 years of pain, of wondering, of praying for his safety. All for this? He hadn't just left me. He had erased me. The weight of that truth hit me like a wave, and I stumbled back against the doorframe, gasping. Emily reached out, trying to steady me. Please don't be mad at him, she said softly. He's sick. He doesn't have much time left. And that was when I saw it. The tremor in his hands, the gray pallor of his skin, the weakness in his stance. He wasn't just back for forgiveness. He was dying. The sound of thunder rumbled in the distance, echoing the night he left me 35 years ago. My heart raced as a storm began to brew again, both outside and inside me. I wanted to shut the door and never see him again. But I also wanted to know everything. Why he left. Why he lied. And why, after all this time, he chose to come back now. As lightning flashed, I realized something deep inside me. This story wasn't over. Not yet. The wind howled, shaking the windows as Richard took one shaky step forward and whispered something that froze my blood. Margaret, I didn't just come back to say goodbye. There's something you need to know. And then, before he could finish, he collapsed on the porch. I screamed. Richard. The sound tore from my throat as he fell face first onto the wooden porch, his hat rolling into the rain puddle. Emily dropped to her knees beside him, crying out, Daddy. Her voice shook with terror. I stood frozen for a moment, my heart thundering in my chest, before rushing to their side. The storm had begun to rage again. The sky dark, rain pouring as if the heavens were weeping with us. Help me turn him over, I shouted, grabbing his shoulder. Together, Emily and I flipped him gently. His face was pale, his lips slightly blue. For one terrifying second, I thought he was gone. But then faintly he groaned. Richard, stay with me. I cried, pressing my trembling fingers against his neck. There was a pulse, weak but there. Relief flooded through me, and tears filled my eyes. You're not dying here, not like this. Emily was already fumbling for her phone. I'm calling an ambulance, she said, her hands shaking. Within minutes, the wail of sirens cut through the sound of the rain. I held Richard's cold hand while paramedics rushed him onto a stretcher. Their voices quick and professional. They asked questions, his name, his age, what happened, but all I could do was stand there in the storm, feeling my past unravel in front of me. Emily climbed into the ambulance with him, her face wet with tears. One of the paramedics turned to me. Ma'am, are you family? I hesitated, then whispered, I'm his wife. The words felt strange on my tongue. For 35 years, I had been a wife to a ghost. Then come with us, he said, helping me into the back. At the hospital, the smell of disinfectant and the soft beeping of machines filled the air. They rushed Richard into the emergency room while Emily and I sat in the waiting area, silent and soaked. I stared at my trembling hands. The rainwater dripped from my coat onto the floor. Emily sat across from me, twisting the hem of her yellow dress. Finally, she spoke. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I looked up, my eyes tired. For what? For everything, she said. For coming here. For existing, maybe. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted to know who he really was. Her voice broke, and she began to cry. I took a deep breath, the anger in me still burning, but beneath it was something else. Pity. This young woman had done nothing wrong. She was caught in the middle of sins she didn't commit. You didn't do anything wrong, Emily, I said softly. You're just a piece of a story that should have ended long ago. She wiped her eyes, looking at me with surprise. You're kind. After everything, you're still kind. I gave a small bitter smile. Kindness isn't weakness, dear. Sometimes it's the only way we survive. Before she could answer, a doctor entered the waiting room. Mrs. Parker, he asked. I stood quickly. Yes, that's me. He looked down at his clipboard, then met my eyes. Your husband had a mild heart attack. He's stable now, but he's very weak. You can see him soon. I felt my knees wobble in relief. Thank you, I whispered. The doctor nodded and walked away. Emily exhaled shakily. He's going to be okay. I nodded, but inside, my thoughts raced. If he had come back now, after all these years, knowing he was sick, what was it he needed to tell me? And why did he wait until he was dying to say it? A few hours later, they let us into his room. Richard was lying there, hooked up to tubes and machines. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. For a moment, I just stood there, watching him. The man who had broken my heart. The man I had loved all my life despite everything. His hair was white, his face lined with age and regret. Time had carved its story deep into him. Emily sat beside him, holding his hand. Daddy, she whispered, I'm here. He opened his eyes slowly. When he saw me, he smiled faintly. Margaret, he breathed. I stepped closer, my throat tight. You gave me quite a scare, I said softly. He tried to chuckle, but it came out as a cough. You always did worry too much. I wanted to be angry, but seeing him like that, fragile, broken, made the anger melt into sorrow. Why did you come back, Richard? I asked quietly. After all this time? He turned his head toward Emily, then back to me. Because I needed to tell you the truth before I go. My stomach twisted. The truth. He nodded slowly. About why I left, and what happened after. Emily squeezed his hand. Daddy, maybe you should rest. No, he said firmly, his eyes still locked on mine. She deserves to know. I waited, my heart hammering. He took a shaky breath. The night I left, I wasn't just running away from us. I was running from something I'd done. I frowned. What do you mean? I got into trouble at work, he said. Money went missing from the railway accounts. I didn't take it, but everyone thought I did. I panicked. I couldn't prove my innocence, and I didn't want to drag you down with me. So I left. My eyes widened. You disappeared because of that? He nodded weakly. I thought I'd find a way to clear my name and come back. But life took a different turn. He looked at Emily again. Then I met her mother. She was kind to me when I had nothing. I thought I could start over. But when she died, I realized I'd built my new life on the ruins of my old one. I stood there, silent, my heart heavy. He turned back to me, tears in his eyes. Margaret, I never stopped loving you. Not a single day. I wanted to believe him. Oh, how I wanted to. But 35 years was a long time. Too long. Before I could speak, the heart monitor began to beep faster. The lines spiked erratically. Doctor! Emily screamed. Nurses rushed in, pushing us aside as the machine wailed louder. The doctor barked orders. Clear. Raise the dose. While we watched helplessly. Richard! I cried, reaching out, but they held me back. His body jerked once, twice, then the monitor flatlined. A long, steady beep filled the room. Emily's scream echoed through the hall. I felt my legs give way beneath me as I fell to the floor. The sound of the rain outside matching the pounding of my heart. But then, just as the doctor was about to call the time, Richard's hand twitched. The monitor blipped. Once. Twice. He was still alive. Barely. The doctor turned to us. He's fighting, but if he makes it through the night, it'll be a miracle. Emily sobbed into her hands. I stood there numb, because in that moment, I realized something terrifying. If he didn't survive the night, I would never know the full truth of what he came to say. And deep in my gut, I felt it. There was more. Something darker. Something he was still hiding. As lightning flashed outside the hospital window, I whispered to myself, "What else are you keeping from me, Richard?" And just then, his eyes fluttered open again. He looked straight at me and said in a hoarse whisper, "Margaret, it wasn't just money. Someone was killed." Then his eyes rolled back. The monitor screamed again. The moment Richard uttered those words, the air inside the hospital room froze. Someone was killed. The words echoed in my head over and over again, like a haunting melody that wouldn't stop. My heart dropped to my stomach. "Richard," I shouted, shaking him lightly. "What do you mean someone was killed? Who was killed?" But his eyes had already rolled back, his breathing shallow, the monitor screaming once more. The nurses rushed back in, shouting for the doctor. Emily and I were forced out of the room again. I stood in the hallway, my heart pounding, my mind spinning in chaos. What had he meant? Was he confessing to murder? Or was he trying to warn me about something? Emily clung to my arm, her face pale. "What's happening?" she cried. "Why would he say something like that?" I shook my head slowly, staring at the closed hospital room door. "I don't know, Emily, but I think your father's been hiding more than just a mistake." The next few hours dragged by like years. I sat in the cold waiting room, the ticking clock loud in my ears. Emily sat across from me, crying silently. At last, the doctor came out again, his face drawn and tired. "He's stable for now," he said softly. "But he's very weak. You should be prepared for anything. He might not wake up again." Emily broke down, covering her face. I just nodded numbly. "Can we see him?" I asked. The doctor nodded. "Yes, but only for a few minutes." When we entered the room again, Richard looked even smaller than before. His chest rose and fell with the help of a machine. His hand rested limp on the blanket. I sat down beside him and gently took his hand in mine. It was cold, so cold. "Richard," I whispered, leaning close. "If you can hear me, you have to tell me what you meant. Who was killed? What did you do?" But he didn't answer. The only sound was the beeping of the monitor. Emily stood near the window, staring out at the gray sky. "Mrs. Parker," she said quietly, "my father, he used to wake up at night screaming. He'd say strange things. Once, I heard him say your name." I looked up sharply. "My name?" She nodded. "He'd say, 'I'm sorry, Margaret. I didn't mean to.' And then he'd cry." I felt a chill crawl down my spine. "Did he ever tell you what it was about?" "No," she said. "Whenever I asked, he'd just look away and say some truths were better buried." I swallowed hard. Well, he's dug them up now. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed in the small hospital chair, watching the rise and fall of his chest. The faint glow of the monitors casting eerie shadows on the walls. Emily had dozed off in the corner, her head against the window. The storm outside had calmed, but inside me, the storm was just beginning. 35 years of silence, and now a confession on his deathbed. What if all those years I spent missing him were built on a lie darker than I could imagine? Then around 2 a.m., I heard a faint sound. "Margaret." My head snapped up. His eyes were open. "Richard," I gasped, leaning closer. "I'm here." He blinked slowly, his lips trembling. "You need to listen," he whispered. "I'm listening," I said quickly, clutching his hand. "Tell me everything." He looked at me, tears pooling in his tired eyes. "It wasn't an accident," he said weakly. "That night, the night I left, someone died. I tried to stop it, but I couldn't." My breath caught. "Who, Richard? Who was it?" He swallowed, struggling to speak. "A man from the railway office. His name was Charles Reed. He caught someone stealing money. There was a fight, and he fell." I frowned. "Fell?" He nodded weakly. "Off the bridge, near the old train tracks." His voice cracked. "I was there. I saw it happen. Everyone thought it was me. But it wasn't." "Then who was it?" I asked. He opened his mouth to answer, but before he could, the door creaked open. A tall man in a black coat stepped inside. His hair was gray, his face sharp and unfamiliar. Emily stirred awake. "Who are you?" she asked sleepily. The man's voice was low and calm. "Detective Sam Hayes," he said, showing a badge. "I'm looking for Richard Parker." I frowned. "Detective? After all these years?" He nodded. "There's been a new development in a cold case. I heard Mr. Parker might have information about the death of Charles Reed. My heart nearly stopped. That's what he was just talking about. The detective looked surprised. So he did mention it? Yes, I said quickly. He said it wasn't an accident, and that someone else was involved. The detective's jaw tightened. I was afraid of that. What do you mean? I asked. He sighed. We reopened the case after new evidence surfaced. Someone recently tried to sell an old railway ledger. The same one that went missing the night Charles Reed died. And guess whose fingerprints were found on it? I stared at him. Whose? He hesitated, glancing at Richard on the bed, then back at me. Your husband's. My stomach twisted. That can't be true. The detective's voice was calm but firm. I'm afraid it is. If he survives, we'll need to question him. I looked down at Richard, who was still conscious but weak. You said you didn't take the money, I whispered. Was that another lie? He shook his head slowly. No, he croaked. I didn't steal it, but I know who did. The detective leaned closer. Then tell us, Mr. Parker. Who was it? Richard's eyes darted toward Emily, then to me. His lips parted, trembling. It was. The words trailed off. He groaned in pain, his body tensing. The monitor beeped faster again. Doctor! I shouted. The detective backed away as the medical team rushed in once more. Emily clung to my arm, crying. Through the chaos, I could still hear his faint voice, barely more than a whisper. It was someone close, someone we trusted. Then the line went flat again. Emily screamed. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. The doctor began chest compressions, shouting for adrenaline. The detective turned away, rubbing his face grimly. I could only stare at my husband's lifeless body as the machine continued its long, unending beep. But even through the shock, one thing burned in my mind. Who was the person we trusted? Who was he protecting all these years? And as I looked at Emily, her face streaked with tears, a terrible thought crossed my mind. What if the truth he was hiding was about her? The sound of that heart monitor still echoes in my mind. The long, flat tone that marked the end of a life and the beginning of a mystery I never asked for. They tried everything to bring Richard back, but it was no use. After 35 years of waiting, my husband came home only to die before my eyes, leaving me with half a confession and a heart full of questions. Emily cried until she couldn't anymore. The detective, Sam Hayes, stood quietly by the door, his face a mix of pity and suspicion. When the doctor finally shook his head and whispered, I'm sorry, I felt the world go still. I didn't scream. I didn't faint. I just stood there, my hands trembling, staring at the man who had been my greatest love and my deepest wound. Richard Parker was gone. Again. Only this time, he wasn't coming back. The next morning, the rain had stopped. The world outside was calm, almost peaceful, as if pretending nothing had happened. Detective Hayes met me in the hospital cafeteria. He had a small notebook open in front of him. Mrs. Parker, he began gently. I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you a few questions. I nodded, my voice barely a whisper. Go ahead. He flipped through his notes. You said your husband told you the night he left, someone died. A man named Charles Reed? Yes, I said softly. He said it wasn't an accident. That someone else was there. The detective leaned forward. Did he give you any names? I hesitated. No. But he said it was someone we trusted. Hayes nodded slowly. That's important. Because we've just confirmed something. He slid a faded photograph across the table. It showed two young men in railway uniforms, smiling proudly beside a train car. That's Richard on the left, Hayes said, tapping the photo. And the man beside him, do you recognize him? I stared at the face beside Richard. My heart skipped a beat. Yes, I whispered. That's Harold. Harold Benson. He was our neighbor back then. Richard's closest friend. The detective nodded grimly. That's right. Harold worked with him at the railway. And guess whose name turned up in the bank records connected to the missing money? My blood ran cold. Harold's. Yes, Hayes said. He vanished a week after Richard did. We always assumed they fled together, but now, he paused, lowering his voice. Now we think Richard ran because Harold killed Charles Reed. I sat back in shock. Harold? But why would Richard protect him? The detective sighed. That's what I'm trying to figure out. But your husband's last words, someone we trusted, might mean Harold wasn't the only one who knew. He hesitated before adding, do you know where Harold's family is now? I shook my head. No. They moved years ago. He nodded slowly, closing his notebook. We'll find them. And Mrs. Parker, if anything comes to mind, even the smallest detail, please call me. He stood, ready to leave, but then paused. Oh, there's something else. We found this in your husband's jacket pocket. He handed me a small, folded envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was an old photograph of me and Richard on our wedding day. And behind it, a letter in his handwriting. I unfolded it slowly, the paper soft and yellowed with age. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, it means I never got the chance to tell you everything. The truth is, I didn't run because I was guilty. I ran because I was scared. The night Charles Reed died, Harold was stealing money from the railway safe. I caught him. So did Charles. They fought, and Charles fell from the bridge. I wanted to go to the police, but Harold begged me not to. He said he'd turn himself in once he got his family out of town. I believed him. But he never did. I spent years looking for proof of my innocence. I found it recently, in the form of that old ledger Harold hid. But I was too sick to bring it to the police myself. Emily doesn't know anything. She's innocent. Please don't blame her for my mistakes or for the years I was gone. I never stopped loving you, Margaret. You were my only home. Forgive me. Richard. The tears came before I could stop them. I clutched the letter to my chest, sobbing quietly. Emily, who had been sitting nearby, came over and knelt beside me. What is it? She asked softly. I handed her the letter. She read it slowly, her lips trembling. When she finished, she wiped her tears and looked at me. He loved you, she whispered. I nodded, my voice breaking. And I loved him, even when I shouldn't have. A week later, we buried Richard on the hill behind the old church. The same place where we used to walk in the spring when the flowers bloomed. The detective attended the funeral quietly, standing at the back. When it ended, he came to me and said, we found the ledger. It clears Richard's name completely. And we're opening a new case for Harold Benson. I nodded, tears blurring my vision. Thank you, detective. He gave me a small smile. Your husband did the right thing in the end. It just took him a lifetime to do it. When he left, I stood by the grave long after everyone was gone. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. I placed the wedding photo on the tombstone, whispering, you're free now, Richard. Rest easy. Emily stood beside me, silent. After a while, she said softly, what will you do now? I smiled sadly. I'll live, dear. For both of us. She took my hand, and for the first time, I felt something warm, like healing. That night, as I sat on the porch of the old house, the same porch where he'd once left me and later returned, I looked up at the stars and whispered, after 35 years, my husband came back home. But what he brought with him broke my heart. Still, in breaking it, he also set it free. Because sometimes the truth hurts, but it's the only thing that lets you breathe again. And that was the life lesson I learned too late. Love is not just about holding on. It's also about letting go. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, I thought I heard his voice in the breeze, whispering my name the way he used to. Then, just like that night 35 years ago, the world went quiet again. Only this time, I wasn't afraid of the silence. I was finally at peace. If you think that was the end of my story, you're wrong. Because what happened next will change everything. Speech balloon, follow and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of my life. Crescent Moon.